All right, so I just wanted to run through this. A lot of it's self-explanatory, but I just thought it would help to have an audio component. So I tried my best to find RIO retention data. Obviously, as we talked about in the meeting, it's slim pickings on our end for that. So some of the more I think useful information I found at the national or even the state level, it just doesn't exist at the RIO level. So Uh, but that is knowing that there's a gap there is, I think, important information in and of itself. So the first thing I looked at was the national retention information, and all of that was found from the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center. They had a lovely spreadsheet packed full of data on the nation as well as each state's specific stats. So there's a lot of abbreviated nomenclature, but essentially they've broken up retention into whether or not the student comes back for the if they start in the fall, do they make it back in the spring, and then they also look at if they come back for the second fall, so they've completed an entire year, and then they come back for their second fall. I think that's the measuring stick most of these are going to use for retention. They're not going to look at that first spring, but I think there's some value in that information, so I thought I would include it. The clearinghouse also broke down retention information based on the type of school. So obviously we have a private nonprofit arm, and then we have a public 2-year arm. So that's what all these look at, and then they further uh, segment that information into the type of student. So full-time students, part-time students, or non-degree seeking, certificate seeking students. And then I've included an all or an overall retention number, and I think it's important to know that that's not a number that would be an average of these three numbers put together, which can show a skew between how many full-time students, how many part-time students, how many non-cert students there are. But essentially, as you can see, the first spring is always going to have higher retention. Um, there's not really any. Certainly, there's qualitative data on the internet, but I was just focusing on the quantitative stuff. But I would say that it's a lot easier to drop out in the summer than it is to drop out in the winter. That would be my guess. Um, but then, as you can see, even without a trend line, it is kind of moving in a downward slope when we think about uh, the private nonprofits versus the public 2 years. The public 2 years are doing overall, they're doing worse than the private nonprofits in the same regards. So that's something to keep in mind. Because I also know that when I talk about the Ohio state statistics and then the RIO school statistics, neither of those statistics, from what I can find, segments um, the public the University of Rio Grande against the community college side of things. So there's just kind of uh, a number that might represent all of it, right? It might represent the one half, might represent the other half. It's unclear, especially on the Department of Education's website. Not a whole lot to go on there, but we can get to that. So here's the Ohio data. Uh, this is also all off of the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center, that spreadsheet that you can download. Interesting, they don't keep track of the different types of students, but they do keep track of age demographics, which they don't do at a national level, at least not that I can see. So, similarly, the first spring retention is higher than the second fall. Both of those are up by tiny little percentages. I think maybe in the grand scheme of things, a tiny percentage matters. At Rio, 0.3%, that's not uh, going to be relevant, but it's important to note that it is on an upward trend at the state level. And then the ages, I think this is because we do have a technical school certification element to our campus here. I think keeping in mind the 25 and older crowd is probably important for us. As you can see here, the 20 and under, they're doing statistically higher than the rest of the state. The 21 to 24 group are lower, and then the 25 and up crowd are lower still. Interesting, the 25 and older crowd at the state level are down a considerable amount, more than 5% for that second fall number. If the second fall retention, if that's the number we want to focus on, or if that's the way we want to measure retention, then that right side of the chart is more important. So that's kind of worrisome that there's this 5% downward trend at the state level. Um, like I said, it didn't seem like there was age data at the national level. Maybe there's just too much data to collect. I'm not sure. But moving on. So there's two types of Rio data. We have one retention document that we've posted ourselves on our website. And then there's the Department of Education, which is pulling information from somewhere. I'm not really sure, and I'll explain my uncertainty for those in a second. But the Department of Education is pulling certain numbers, and then the National Center for Education Statistics, they have very different numbers, and they're not at all they're not collecting the same thing as the Department of Education. So there's some gaps and some uncertainties. It seems like, from what I can tell, that either both of the sites or maybe just one or the other are not accounting for the fact that we have this Rio Grande Community College aspect. The Department of Education says that in 2022 we only had 750 students or so. When I know that's not the case, so they're either completely excluding or they're not being able to get that data, or maybe we're not providing that data to them. But their retention, for example, is only 58 for first year, first year students, which is lower than our internal information. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Um, these first time, full time, and the enrollment path stuff, that's all Department of Education information. They were collating withdrawals, graduations, and transfers, and I think to a certain extent, transfers and withdrawals could be a combined number if you're wanting to increase retention, but obviously transfers are a little different than withdrawals. But I did want to just include that information. It does seem that first time, full time students are having a harder time getting across that finish line than the first time part time, as well as transfer students. And I think the transfer students, maybe a qualitative explanation for that would be that they already tried it somewhere else that didn't work out for them. There's a reason they're choosing to come here. There's more of a, I want to say autonomy, that might be the wrong word, but there's more personal choice in coming to this school, so that might be why graduation rates are higher, why the withdrawal rates, at least for the full-time students, are lower. But those first-time, full-time, or as I've abbreviated later, first-time, first-year students, the 50s, if you will, those folks are transferring at the highest rate, also with a pretty high withdrawal rate, only being beaten by the part-time transfer students. So I think maybe a key area to focus on would be those first-time, first-year students that are also full-time. Any kind of strategies to keep them here. And then the National Center for Education Statistics, they have interesting data that doesn't really fall under any of these other umbrellas. So the first year full time retention percentages, they have RIO sitting at 64%, which is 6% higher than the DOE. And then the 50 part-time retention is at 67, so we are able to hang on to those part-time students more tightly. And then they also have this weird calculation where they're measuring how many of those students are graduating given 150% of degree time. So if it's a 4-year degree, how many of those people are graduating in 6 years? If it's a 2-year degree, how many of those people are graduating in 3 years? And they have these rates 32%, 31%, so roughly the same. And those are not the same as the DOE data unless they are only calculating for those first-time first years. It doesn't seem like the National Centers of Education Statistics is keeping track of part-time students or transfer students. But I just thought this information is useful also to kind of compare that with RIO's own internal information. So the internal data, this graph, I just copy and pasted this from our annual retention report. And this is literally all we have. We are measuring first year, first time students retention from the first year to the second year. So they're not doing the first spring retention. They're only doing the second fall retention. And then they're measuring for people that are pursuing associate's degrees, people that are pursuing bachelor's degrees. So I don't really know if that includes if they're just lumping in people that are just here for certificates. I have no idea what that means for the CCP students. And the CCP students, obviously, this is a different animal to kind of quantify. And I'm not even sure how we would go about handling like what category do they fit in, right? Because they're not really pursuing a degree. They're not. It's just different. I mean, I'm new here, so I'm not even really sure where they go. But I think this chart specifically, I'm not sure if they're even included in this chart at all. So that's something to think about. But this is it. They don't account for the type of student, full-time, part-time. They don't account for age like the state data does. So I'd be interested to see maybe a new measuring system for RIO retention. And then this last graph, so the Ohio state data that I was able to find does not differentiate between the private nonprofit and the community 2-year or the public 2-year schools. Neither does the external RIO data, or from what I can tell, the internal RIO data. So that retention number is kind of just a conglomerate of whoever they got to do their wherever they're pulling their data from. So that 62.4%, that is an aggregate number of the RIO's internal data, the DOE's data, and the NCES data. And as you can see here, Ohio as a state is doing not better than the national average for private nonprofits, but it is doing better than the national average for public 2-year. But again, it's impossible to know how that data is separated because it wasn't separated at the state level in that way. So it's we might be doing worse, we might be doing better. I would argue, since the private nonprofits, the bigger side of our campus, we're probably not doing better than the national average as far as the state is concerned. And then again, that RIO data is an aggregate from those three uh, sources, and as you can tell, we're a little over 10% less than the state average. So there's definitely room for improvement. I would say that COVID does some weird things to data and graphs and charts and stuff, but the internal RIO data says that we're looking good in terms of retention over last year, but the year before that, we're either decreasing or we're plateauing. So retention on, even measured against whatever we're measuring ourselves with right now, we're kind of plateauing. Um, so yeah, that was all the data that I found, and I thought it would be helpful to kind of do this audio review with that information.